Do not try and bend the spoon. That's impossible. Instead, only try to realize the truth.
What truth?
There is no spoon.
Let the good times roll. Kawasaki for kids, new from Remco.
Yeah, okay. Woo! All right, I'm glad somebody laughed at the Kawasaki joke because I was pretty ropey when I put that last video together. Okay, welcome to Nerd... I can't do that. Welcome to Nerd Night number 44, Effective Cat Privacy. Yeah, I just mashed the keywords together. We were having trouble coming up with the title. I like it, though. It has a ring to it. Yeah, Nerd Night Tokyo is the local franchise of a global event. There are Nerd Nights all over the world. Every month, we host 3 speakers who talk about their field of expertise. This can be science communication talks, but also talks about art, humanities, activism, and even weird hobbies, like we had last time. Weird hobby. There is booze. Please buy some. We're still figuring things out with the venue here, and yeah, being able to sell booze really helps us out. Negotiating and stuff. Yeah, as we're still rebooting after a very long hiatus, for those of you who are new. Who is new tonight, actually? 1, 2, okay. Okay. Hi, welcome. Yeah, so we're still rebooting from a long hiatus, so if you have a good time here, it would be really nice if you could, tweet it out. I mean, if you want to pull out your phones now and, like, snap a photo of this and say, hey, look at this cool thing I'm at. It's also happening next month. You could do that, or you can wait till I get to the slide that shows next month. Okay, let's hit the next slide, Yoji. There we. Space. No, you just changed the lights. So it's okay. I will fix the lights in a second, but on the big computer. Okay. There we go. It's a new computer today that I dragged here in a big Costco bag. We're still figuring some stuff out. Our next event is December 16th here at the World Peace Theater. Yeah, this is a good time if you want to take out your phones and take a picture of this. Here, I'll even this is Mimi, right? Let's get this go viral before Twitter crashes and burns and no one goes viral ever again. It's only a matter of time, my friends. Right. By the way, if you want to speak at our next event, well, not our next event, but a future event, contact a team member. Can we just, can I get all the team members to put their hands up other than me? There's Melvin, Yoji, Coco, Bruce, and Selena. So if you want to talk or you want to speak again, if you've done it in the past, talk to us. We like speakers. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Beakers. We have Nerd Night branded beakers. You can do science experiments with them. You can drink out of them. You can probably do a bunch of other things that I can't imagine. But they're good. They're actual Pyrex glass. You can put hot stuff in them. If you put really hot stuff in them, do not touch them with your bare hands. As I think most of us learned in grade 7 science the hard way. Anyway, they're for sale at the bar. Andrew's holding them up over there. There, you can't really see them that well, but you can see them on the screen. That's why I put the photo up there. All right, next slide, please. Whoa. Just click the one before it, and then whee! Selena, you happy with the new picture? You didn't like the one I did last time. I'll talk about more about this at intermission, but we still need volunteers. It's a bigger setup than it was when we used to do this in Tokyo. It's much more complicated, and it would be nice to have a couple more people, especially people who go south afterwards, so they can stay a bit later and don't have to run for their last train. Speaking of which, everybody on the intermission, please check your last train to make sure you know what time you have to leave here. Since the pandemic, they have changed the train times. All right, next slide, please. All right, tonight we are bringing you these three smart speakers. First off, Lewis is going to talk to us about effective altruism. Maybe not about the way it's been making the rounds on social media for the last week or so, but maybe, who knows. But, the thing itself. He's going to talk about the thing itself. Then, Lee is here to talk to us about the how and why of rescuing cats. And finally, our own Andrew Bruce Todd that's three first names, will last give us his talk on privacy on the web. We saved that one for when you're all good and drunk. Did I mention to buy drinks at the bar? Tip your waitress. I'll be here all week. After each talk, there'll be a quick Q&A. Please wait for the mic to come so that people who are watching at home or not watching at home, as it may be, this is also being recorded, but so they can hear you, okay? Also, please make your questions not dissertations and actual questions. Okay. And just one more slide here. Next one. So Matthew was actually supposed to be our third speaker tonight. So I have some not so great news. He was supposed to be speaking tonight. He was going to complete our trifecta of talks about like nonprofit, charity kind of stuff. But he has terminal stage 4 cancer, and he's recently started a charity called Make Cancer History that aims to connect patients to resources and treatments. And he couldn't join us tonight because after 3 years of no evidence of disease, his cancer's come back, and he's had to start an extremely brutal chemo regime. So, I mean, yeah, not fun. But I told him that regardless, I would post his GoFundMe page. So this page funds the charity, also funds any treatments not covered by insurance, all evidence-based, I assure you. Don't worry, no coffee enemas or fruit juices or anything like that. And the general expenses of having really severe cancer. So please, anyway, there's a QR code. You can check that out. And if you want to get that from me later, you can also do that. But yeah, so let's move on. Next slide. All right. Lewis is our first speaker. Lewis Costigan leads the Japan chapter of Effective Altruism. He is originally from the United Kingdom, but has lived in Tokyo for 10 years, lightweight, where he has worked as a contractor for 3 farm animal welfare organizations, as well as in technology as a project manager and consultant. In his spare time, he likes to play video games and drums and listens to podcasts, presumably all at the same time. Anyway, please welcome Lewis. Lewis, where are you? Get up here. Do your talk. I will turn this off. Yay!
Hey, can everyone hear me? Cool. 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 I'm Lewis. I'm from Effective Altruism Japan. Today I kind of want to talk about uncertainty and how we should address uncertainty when it comes to doing better. Specifically 3 different ways in which you can be uncertain. And I need the thing. Cool. So first, let me just give a brief introduction of what is effective altruism. So effective altruism is best defined as kind of a collection of institutions and communities, individuals, possibly even a research field, trying to answer the seemingly simple question, how can we use our limited resources to do the most good, impartially considered? And it seems like kind of like a simple question, but there's many implications. It goes in many different directions. But simply put, the world has many problems. We should probably take a step back and then try to think about how we can prioritize those problems. And so in order to do that, the Effective Altruism community has a framework called the INT framework, the INT framework. And so the I in the INT framework is importance. So given a specific world problem, how many people or sentient beings are affected by that problem and by how much. So something like climate change is seemingly very important. It will affect many people in a big way. The second criterion is neglectedness. So how many resources, how much time, how much attention is already being paid to this problem. So something like climate change is very important, but you could argue that it's less neglected than other issues. However, I actually made this slide back in 2018, and that was before coronavirus. And at the time, I said something that might be important but neglected is pandemic preparedness. Yeah, pandemics, even after COVID-19, it seems that not many resources are being spent on trying to prevent the next pandemic. And so by the criteria of how important and neglected an issue is, pandemic preparedness seems like very important and still very neglected. And then the third criterion is tractability. So is there something practical you can do to solve this problem? So something that's very important and neglected is aging. All of us age, it affects all of us. It's very neglected. Not too many people are actually focusing on trying to prevent or reverse aging, the processes of aging. But it's seemingly thought as not that tractable. Not too many people are working on it because it's a very, very difficult problem to solve. I know now that a few more people are working on it. It's gaining some more traction. But that's something that's just potentially not that tractable. So in that case, what are some issues that are important, neglected, and tractable? Well, there's a few issues that people focus on in the effective altruism community, and I'll give like a brief overview of them here. So in the top left, we have helping the poor, so scaling up proven health treatments, giving cash to the world's poorest people. On the top right, we have kind of saving humanity at large and making sure humanity flourishes over time. So, you know, the pace of AI development is very quick. We're not doing much research into how to make sure that that goes well. So that could be potentially something that's important, neglected, and quite tractable. In the bottom left, we have alleviating suffering. So most donations these days go to helping pets, you know, dogs and cats in shelters if you're going to direct those donations towards animals. But most suffering happens on factory farms. That seems to be an important thing to work on. And also just this kind of way of thinking just isn't that popular yet. I started EA Japan back in 2018 after realizing that no one's really working on this here. And I think spreading awareness of this way of thinking could be potentially quite high impact. So moving on, I'd just like to, I've given an introduction to effective altruism many times. I didn't want to repeat the same introduction. We have social events, we have, you know, you can meet me one-on-one if you want like a full introduction to EA. But today, given that it's Nerd Night, I'd rather just focus and dig deep into a few different ways that you can be uncertain. Another thing, I'm not an academic, but I will try my best. I'm not a complete expert on any of these topics, but these are things that were kind of like academically or like intellectually interesting. So I'm going to introduce a few of these. Yeah, so the first thing that you might be uncertain about is the effectiveness of an intervention or a program. So let me motivate why you should consider this as something important. It turns out that there are large differences in the cost effectiveness of different interventions. So on the screen here, we have 5 different interventions that focus on AIDS. So surgical treatment for Kaposi's sarcoma. Kaposi's sarcoma is what's known as an AIDS-defining illness. And that's something that after you develop AIDS is something that's relatively easy to develop afterwards. There are other interventions you could donate to or implement. For example, antiretroviral therapy, prevention of transmission of HIV during pregnancy, condom distribution, or education for high-risk groups. And it seems that there's a big difference in the cost effectiveness, how much life is saved. I'll briefly explain DALY. So DALY stands for Disability Adjusted Life Year. So 1 DALY is 1 full year of full health, but 0.5 DALYs would be 1 full year of half health. And it's obviously going to be kind of subjective as to what condition leads to what degree of well-being. But that's just one way of kind of quantifying and measuring how cost effectiveness different interventions would be. And another way of framing this is that the difference in cost effectiveness of different interventions follows a heavy-tailed distribution, not a normal distribution. So a lot of people, when they were surveyed by an effective altruist group called 80,000 Hours, they mentioned that they think the best charities are maybe 2-3 times more cost effective than the median charity. But if the differences follow a heavy-tailed distribution, that cost effectiveness difference could be 100, 200, 300 times more. And if you think about that as one life saved for a certain cost, if you can save 100, 200, 300 lives instead, that seems very important. And so how can you figure out which interventions to donate to as an individual? So GiveWell is a place that you can do that. GiveWell is a meta-charity that evaluates the effectiveness of other charities, focusing on global health. They recommend charities to individual donors. GiveWell has a 6-step research process. I won't go into the entire thing today, but the one thing I do want to focus on is independent evidence using studies such as RCTs or randomized controlled trials to understand the effectiveness of a program. I will also point out number 2, modeling cost effectiveness. GiveWell has like a giant Google sheet to model how cost effective they think different interventions are based on their evidence. And the first time I ever donated, kind of back in 2016, 2017, you can input different values for maybe moral weights pertaining to different interventions, and it outputs what charity they might recommend to you. So that kind of thing might be interesting if you're interested in just trying to figure out some effective donation and then inputting some of your own opinions on that. That seems kind of important. But yeah, they also implement interviews and site visits, budget reviews, reviewing charities' data, and like an ongoing assessment of what the charity is doing. But today I just want to focus briefly on RCTs. So what is an RCT? What is a randomized controlled trial? So I think most people have probably heard of a double-blind clinical trial in which you have patients with a condition. They are split into an experimental and a control group. The control group is there to mimic what would have happened without the medicine, so they're given a placebo. The experimental group is given the medicine. And then you measure the difference between the experimental group and the control group of whatever you are trying to measure. You can employ the same technique to interventions focused on global health or what have you. So the idea here is to be able to attribute differences in outcomes between the group of participants and the comparison group to the program as opposed to other factors. So what kind of interventions should you focus on? Well, one way of looking at it is first trying to figure out the causality between something happening and then the thing you want to fix. So on the left, there is kind of a generalized diagram of what that looks like. On the right, let's say there's a population that has like a prevalence of diarrhea. You don't know where the diarrhea is kind of coming from. So in this case, you might hypothesize that maybe people aren't able to drink clean water. If you take that one step further, maybe people aren't able to drink clean water because they choose not to drink clean water, and that might be because they don't understand the benefits of clean water. Maybe they just don't know. They can't differentiate between clean and dirty water. It might be the case that they don't have clean water at home. Trying to understand this kind of causal link between the thing you're trying to fix is super important. And so this is just an example case of a potential RCT. So imagine a small community in India that has a low immunization rate for a prevalent disease. You think people aren't getting immunized because they don't understand the benefits of vaccines. So you suggest an educational program about the effects of vaccines. You think that might lead to higher immunization rates. You pick 2 populations close by to each other to minimize the difference between the 2, trying to figure out the counterfactual. And then you implement the program in those populations and measure the result. So the blue line at the bottom is the counterfactual, what would have happened without the program. The yellow line indicates what happened with the program, and that delta in the impact you understand from the RCT. This is kind of like an idealized example. It might be that the program had like a bad effect or it was completely neutral, but that's what you'd hope to see if you're implementing some kind of intervention. So that's one way in which you can be uncertain. You can also be uncertain about future events. And so I want to motivate why you might want to understand more about future events. Having a better understanding of the future leads to better decision making now, simply put. So if you understand the likelihood of will Russia detonate a nuclear weapon in Ukraine before 2024, if you understood that, then maybe you could make better decisions that would lead to better outcomes. The second question, will there be a novel pathogen that kills over 25 million people between 2022 and 2031? If you understood the likelihood of that, it would determine potentially how much you should invest in pandemic prevention. I don't have too much time, so I'll leave the final question. So you might say, well, okay, how can you make better decisions about the future? Probably the most common approach for forecasting the future is just listening to experts in the news, on TV, what have you. The problem with that is that experts tend to make vague predictions, and they backtrack when they're told that their prediction didn't necessarily come true, and they don't necessarily have strong track records. So the academic on the right, Philip Tetlock, author of Super Forecasting, he believes that we should trust people with a strong track record of predictions, even if they don't have domain knowledge about a specific topic, more than we should trust experts with domain knowledge. So how does super forecasting work? I'm not a super forecaster, I can't go into complete detail about this, but apparently the following advice is good. So you should form a prior probability as to whether or not an event would occur. To do this, you might look at the base rate. So if you think about the question, will Russia detonate a nuclear weapon in Ukraine before 2024? Well, a nuclear weapon hasn't been dropped on a population in a very long time, even though things may have seemed tumultuous. So you should probably start with how frequently did this event occur in the past. And then, of course, you should integrate into that model new information about the current situation in Ukraine. And you should do that kind of slowly and systematically. Don't have time to go completely into detail about that now. But one thing to mention is you're aiming to be well calibrated, not right 100% of the time. And so what that means is if you were to predict 10 events, and you say for each of those events, each of them are 80% likely, you should expect that 8 of those events actually occur and 2 of them don't, so that your predictions, the likelihood that you expected, matches the frequency in reality. And so there are places online where people do this, the most popular of which is called Metaculus. So if we just look at the bottom here, this is a question on Metaculus, one of the questions I gave earlier. If you look at the bottom left, this is just a line indicating the median prediction over time. The middle graph is just a histogram of like the frequency at which people have expected this to happen. And then on the far right, we have the median 13% community estimate. And if that's the case, there's a huge life cost, there's a huge economic cost to a pandemic that kills over 25 million people. And that probably means that we should invest a lot in pandemic preparedness. And yeah, just an example of how this community performed relative to experts is it was very ahead in predicting the invasion of Ukraine relative to experts. So back in January, the median prediction in the community was 47%, and the probability the day before the invasion was 80%. This was at a time that a lot of people were saying that Ukraine would not be invaded by Russia. Aside from Metaculus, there are also prediction markets. I probably don't have time to go into that now, but Polymarket is a place where you can place bets on future events and actually make money. Not too many people do that right now, so there's not too much liquidity, which means that there's a limit to the number of questions that you can actually pose with meaningful answers. So Manifold Markets is a place where you can produce a lot of questions and people play with fake money to try and make predictions. And that kind of financial incentive leads people to the truth a lot more than kind of other methods. I'll very briefly go over this because I feel like I'm going to go over time. So dealing with moral uncertainty, I think, is also super important, partly because our sense of morality is just molded by our experiences to a great extent. And we should acknowledge that we should be morally uncertain, and that should encourage us to be more humble. So one motivating case is, I'm not vegan, but I've worked for farm animal welfare organizations in the past. And I'm not 100% sure that animals do in fact suffer, because I've never experienced being an animal. And that's kind of like an epistemic question, a question of the state of the world. But like separately to that is the question, do animals have moral value? Or do they not have moral value? And I will assign probably a very low credence to animals having no moral value and a higher one to animals having moral value. But if I eat meat and animals have moral value, that seems a significant wrong. Whereas if they have no moral value, that would be permissible by some moral theory. And if I eat vegetarian, it's permissible either way. I probably don't have time to go into detail about other things. I've got like 10 slides on this that I've moved to the back, and I think I'm probably over time. It says there's 7 minutes. I think that started very late. Okay. I think it's okay. So yeah, further suggestions on what to do given uncertainty. So first, we should appreciate how complex these questions are. And that means, to me, we should be uncertain by default. I think I've always been a person that a lot of my friends, for example, back in the UK, have like strong political opinions about things. And I kind of always take a step back and think, I just don't know anything about this situation. I think I should probably just be, unless I'm willing to invest like a lot of time understanding it, uncertain by default. Also, if you donate, consider donating across a range of causes. So I guess the reason for this is if you were to invest your money and expect a return, it's very rare that someone just invests in one stock and hopes for the best. We have uncertainty, so we diversify our portfolios. In the same way, if we donate, we might consider donating to different things and kind of like trying to maximize the expected return on that donation in terms of impact. And also consider the value of new information. So few people research new ideas or try new things. Obviously, if you do something new, you have the impact of doing that, plus you gain information, and that's a benefit. So it's just a bonus, and you should try and consider that when you think about doing good. Okay, so yeah, thanks everyone for listening. My name's Louis Costigan. There's my email address. Effective Altruism Japan has a Facebook group and a meetup group. We have social events once a month in usually Nakameguro, Shibuya area, so feel free to sign up. And also feel free to talk to one of us. We have a few members of EA Japan here during one of the breaks or after the event. Thank you.
All right, Louis, thank you so much. So now we're going to open up to a Q&A. Actually, Yoji, sorry, can you hit the space bar on the lighting machine? Thank you. Just so we can see your faces. Yeah, so yeah, we have like about 10 minutes of Q&A. If people want to ask questions, try to keep them reasonably short, not dissertations. Make sure there's a question mark at the end. And yeah, I'll just wait for the mic. So just put up your hand and I will, oh, that was fast. Here you go.
Hi, thank you for the talk. So my question is on those super predictors. You were talking about people who are very good at predicting. Are they able to explain their thought process and are after the fact, and are they consistent, or is it purely intuition?
I don't think it's intuition. I think they are quite meticulous about like if they're going to predict like a specific event, trying to get as much information about that as possible. But there are like techniques you can use. So like, as I mentioned, like trying to form like a base rate of if you're going to predict an event to happen in future, how often has that event occurred in the past? And then just kind of update slowly and methodically from that. But yeah, from what I understand, people who like engage in super forecasting, like the best people at that, invest a lot of time trying to really understand the situation. It's not something you could do potentially that intuitively because we're just not good at making those things like on an intuitive basis.
Boop, boop. I saw Melvin. Did someone else have a question over here? Okay, we'll come back. What's that? All right, yeah.
All right, thanks for the talk. I was curious about the group you mentioned, EA Japan. I was wondering, like, is the aim of the group just to like educate people about effective altruism, or are you like, kind of like, I hate to use the word, but like kind of like an investing group? Are you like, how would I say, putting in your donations kind of like as a group, or do you leave those kinds of decisions down to the individual and just do the like the intellectual academic discussions as a group?
Yeah, we might encourage our members to make donations as individuals, but that's not really any part of the group, like any significant part of the group. right now, I think what's important is in Japan, EA is just not a well-known concept. And so we just need to build like a foundation of people that can like understand EA to a nuanced degree, and then we focus on like different programs after that. So yeah, mainly we have social events, so the community is fun to be part of. I want to do reading groups in the very near future. We've actually just received funding and completed some translations of EA-related material into Japanese. Anyone can feel free to like ask for a link to that. That's fine. Yeah, right now it's just about educating people about EA, and then in future we expect to do like some really cool things.
やったけど。Okay, so I actually have two questions. One is, you were talking about with donations, it's better to diversify and donate funds to a variety of organizations. With like volunteering, with like active help in that way, do you think that's also important to diversify, or do you think it's kind of important to focus on one thing? And my other question is about living in a different country, culture, government. I find that it's often difficult to do the same kind of work that I would do in my native country. And so how do you deal with kind of the barriers that you come across to doing charity work in Japan?
Okay.
Sorry to, yeah. Do you want me to, yeah.
Yeah, so the first question again?
The first question was about diversifying volunteering. Like, is it good to diversify that too?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's important to just be a good person, right? And like that's something that if you're trying to do the most effective thing, like volunteering your time might not necessarily be the most effective thing you can do. Let's say that you have a career and you can earn like a certain amount of money per hour. Like technically you could just work more hours for that career and then donate it to someone with more capacity who's doing something more impactful that you could do in your local area. But I think that also neglects just being a good person, and I think that's like a really important part of being altruistic and just living in general. So I wouldn't like neglect that. Sorry, and then the second question.
Takes a second to come on. The second question was about dealing with the barriers of doing kind of charity work or altruistic work in a different country with different mindsets. I mean, you mentioned like in Japan, EA is not really a commonly known thing. So how do you deal with those barriers here?
Yeah, honestly, I guess I have a lot of uncertainty about that too, like doing altruistic things specifically in Japan. I've lived in Japan for 10 years, and I know a couple of things about Japan. Like Japanese people tend not to donate as much as like people in the US and the UK, for example. I think in Japan it's like 0.2%. No, yeah, 0.02% of GDP is donated, but in the US, it's 10 times that, like 0.2%. No, wait, there's 0.2% for Japan and 2% for the US. And that's because, like, in the US, of course, you have, like, many churches and people donating to their local community, that kind of thing. In the UK, it's like 0.7%, something like that. There's just not that much of a religious, like, or that kind of, like, cultural influence to donate. But then, like, you know, aligning what EA might mean with, like, the intricacies of Japanese culture, that's a really complex question, and I have an intuition, I guess, from living here for 10 years, but like I haven't ever tried to research it fully, and I couldn't give you a good answer.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any questions? Yeah.
The meticulous question thingy that you mentioned earlier, that's a very interesting tool, and that relies on the crowd. It's like crowd knowledge sourcing. I have two questions about it. Number one, how many correct predictions has it made? Do you have any data?
My understanding is that it's more accurate than experts in many cases, but like that would require quantifying expert predictions and then trying to like, you know, like form a ratio between the two. I don't have good data on that. All right,
thank you. And the second one is, how do you prevent people from trolling at those kind of questions? Because if it's open for everyone, there's always someone who can troll. Yeah. Or there's always a group of people who can troll and just mess with the whole answer. Yeah. Do you have any tools for that? Do they have any tools for that?
I'm not sure about Metaculus itself. I'm not a developer for Metaculus. I don't know the intricacies of the system, but I can say that there is like a median prediction of the community, and there's a meticulous prediction, and that gives far higher weighting to people that have a stronger track record. And if you're going to use these kinds of questions for some like specific purpose of like defining a policy or how much you should invest in a certain thing, then you would use the weighted like prediction as opposed to the median prediction.
Thank you for the talk. I see what you're doing as kind of a special case of a much broader category of things, which would be influence campaigns, right, in general. And there's a lot of influence campaigns for good or bad or for, you know, greedy purposes or political purposes. My first question is, can you use their methods for altruistic goals, right, by adopting the best practices or most effective practices in more broader class of influence campaigns? And the second question is, I think it's easier to do bad than it is to do good, so how do you compete?
Okay, yeah. For the influence campaigns, I guess there's a trade-off between like promoting effective altruism as like something simple, like, oh, you can do the most good, and then promoting it as something that is a bit more nuanced. And if I just adopted like the best practices of influence campaigns, I would just be committing to mass outreach, and that wouldn't necessarily preserve like some of the important things about the community, like a dedication to being like, as you could never be correct about anything, but like as correct as possible. And so like, it's not necessarily this, we're trying to get as many people as possible on board with this. It's more just like, there's many things we're optimizing for at the same time. And then trying to influence people as best we can isn't necessarily going to achieve that goal. And then it's easier to do bad than to do good. I completely agree, and that's why some of the things here I presented try to reduce uncertainty as much as possible. It's definitely the case with certain interventions. So there's a book that explains effective altruism that was released back in, I think, 2014, 2015, called Doing Good Better. One of the arguments in that book was that, again, like some interventions are just much more effective than others. And one of the interventions that they gave as an example, something that generated like a lot of publicity, was something called play pumps. So in many places in Africa, it's hard to get water out of the ground. They have like a certain pump system. And someone invented a play pump, which is basically like a roundabout that kids can play on. And then people would like get free water just from the kids playing on this pump. But obviously, kids get bored of that. It has to have added friction because you're trying to also generate water out, like get water out of the ground. And it ended up that people were like, had these way less efficient pumps that were there before, even though it seemed like, oh, we're killing two birds with one stone. This seems like a simple solution. And so having like an RCT, figuring out what the actual outcomes are, really important to prevent that kind of thing from happening. There's other examples like that, but yeah, like this is the whole point of like trying to reduce uncertainty. We don't want to do bad things and then just think, oh, we're donating to this and get the emotional payback from that and not actually focus on the impact. We want to actually have like a good effect on the world.
I think this will have to be our last question because we need to go to a break, but let me just bring the mic. La 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 la. Sorry, I'm just talking so people at home don't get bored.
I'll make this quick then. How much do you think is there a difference between, amongst like the community you talk about, of a vague sense of you could probably do the things that you all kind of roughly agree on better, versus the signing up to like quite a committed like moral position? Now you talk about the pet and animal example. It might be some people just care more about dogs than cows, and that might be their moral position. Or you could save more lives if you saved young people than old people, but maybe you just care about, like, I don't know, the elderly dying well. For instance, you want to donate to hospices rather than malaria nets. And I guess how much is like the difference between just trying to optimize what people think is best versus the stronger like moral commitment to this is the best way of thinking?
Yeah, I'd say a lot of people in the effective altruist community are just trying to do as much good as possible, and they're kind of passionate about the question of like how do we do that, right? And so if you have like a specific passion about like a specific area, I honestly think that plays like a huge part in like the things that you might want to focus on. And I also don't necessarily think that me focusing on like farm animal welfare is the absolute best thing that I could be doing. But I've had dogs my whole life. I have a dog now, and I love animals, right? And so I think like to me that's like a huge reason why I focus on that more than anything else. There is obviously like some like orthogonality, like some difference between like being as effective as possible and what you're interested in, and appreciating that is important. But like if you try to do like the most impactful thing and you're not passionate about it, you're going to do a bad job anyway. You really do need to like have like some element of personal fit. I do think that's like very important.
Thanks.
All right. That's it. That wraps it up. You can still talk to Lewis. He's still going to be around. Yeah, but thank you so much. Can I get a round of applause for this guy here? So we are going to take a 15-minute break, buy booze at the bar. We've got some really strange things up there. Hey, Andrew, can you tell us some of the strange things we've got? Matcha Kahlua. Really? Okay. We don't have any milk though, so what other weird stuff have we got? Lots of different odd juice. The kind of juices you get like in the little can at the usually at the Thai restaurants and stuff. Some American beer. We have Budweiser. If any of the nerds here feel like Bud, this Bud's for you. All right. Yeah, we've got some nice. I think we've got some Vietnamese beers left, right? Do you say we have blood alcohol? Non-alcoholic. Okay, that makes a lot more sense. All right, guys, I will not stop you from drinking any longer. Go buy booze, be merry, and I will come and talk to you again when it's time to come back. Bye. Hey, welcome back. Welcome back, welcome back, welcome back. Just a reminder to get your beakers if you want them. They're still on sale at the bar and will remain on sale for a while. Let's hit the next slide. I am contractually obligated. No, these are our friends. Space Cafe, they're our friends. They have an event on December 13th. What is it going to be about? It is a mystery. We don't know, right? Suspense is good. Also, that day is my birthday, I just realized. But, so, not yet. On December the 13th. That's like a month from now. You go next Nerd Night will be the time to wish me happy birthday. All right, because we are back on the 16th. Yes, they're planning. So my text here says they're planning an event on the most important day of the year, and they're at Good Heavens in Shimokitazawa. Not here. Don't come here on December 13th. There will be no one here. Well, there might be a bunch of little kids doing gymnastics, but there won't be Space Cafe. Go to Shimokitazawa. Go to Good Heavens Pub. They're going to have some cool spacey talks, please. Please. Why did I say please? I don't know. I'm vamping because I lost my place in the document. Okay, anyway, you can find them on Twitter at this thing. It's not an address, but anyway, as long as Twitter is still up, I suppose. Mr. Musk hasn't run it into the ground yet. Anyway, if you like nerdy talks about space, this is going to be your thing. Check them out. Next slide, please. Okay, I'm going to do this real fast. Let's talk a little bit more about this. Nerd Night has got a lot of moving parts, as those of you who maybe came near the earlier end of this evening realized, as you saw us running about. And as lovely as our volunteers are, we're always on the lookout for more, especially people who can help with back sort of behind the scenes stuff, but also, so the things listed here, I won't go through them. And also people who can help set up and tear down, people perhaps who are going south like me and have late trains, last trains, because the tear down is kind of a pain. Also setup, which it's frequently just Melvin and I doing the setup. So if anyone's available before 6 o'clock on Nerd Nights, that would be super. Okay, if you're interested in that, come and talk to me or any one of our lovely volunteers. And of course, we're always looking for new speakers or returning speakers. Hint, hint, you guys. All right, next slide. YTG. So, Nerd Night Tokyo, unlike the other Nerd Nights, is produced by the Yokohama Theater Group. We're a registered nonprofit. We are not effective altruism. We are just ineffective altruism. The fun kind. And YTG is the beneficiary of any net income that Nerd Night is able to produce. So you're already being inefficient and supporting YTG by being here tonight. We're currently running a large fundraising campaign to help recover from the pandemic. And if you're keen on theater stuff, we're also looking for volunteers. Mostly the same things that you just saw on the thing for Nerd Night. They're very similar holes in our volunteer organization for that. All right. Next slide. Let's go. And now, this brings us to our second speaker of the evening, Lee Atkin, who was born and raised in the United States. Never heard of it. English teacher by day, servant, can opener, bed, and nighttime heater for her feline overlords by night. Perhaps unsurprisingly, she is the volunteer coordinator for the Tokyo branch of Japan Cat Network. Her cat's breath smells like cat food. Give a big hand for Lee Atkin of Japan Cat Network. Yay!
Yes, please. All right, so cat rescue, the full litter scoop. And yeah, that is clean litter. Not everyone wants to see the dirty stuff. I don't want to see the dirty stuff. So first off, who am I? I am a cat lover. I have been since I was born. I will be to the day I die. I gotta have a cat in my life, otherwise something isn't quite right. I'm also a volunteer with JCN. That started off as just being part of the Facebook group, giving advice and feedback to other people who had questions about cats, cat care, what to do in certain situations. From there, I was invited to join the admin team, and then somehow I got roped into being the volunteer coordinator when we were still up in Fukushima. Not quite sure how that happened, but oh well. Then we moved to Shinjuku, and now we're in Setagaya, and I am still the volunteer coordinator, somehow. I'm also a foster mom. I've had at least 6 cats that have come through and successfully fostered them, meaning they went on to their forever home. I've kind of failed at it 4 times, though. Couldn't say goodbye. Look at those sweet little faces. Could you let them go? I love my babies. They're so cute, such good boys. So what is JCN? JCN is Japan Cat Network. We are an English-speaking rescue that's been around for over 20 years. One of the things that makes us unique is the fact that we are an English-speaking group, and that's because a lot of the Japanese-speaking groups kind of look at you and like, oh, you're a foreigner. Nope, we don't want anything to do with you. They just don't quite trust us because we just like up and leave and abandon the cats. No, we don't. We take care of them too. They're our babies. So we've been around for a while, and so people who can't get through to the cat rescue world with the Japanese groups tend to come to us, and a couple of others that are in Japan. We did some work in Fukushima after the earthquake and the tsunami. One of our admins, Susan, was actually going into the exclusion zone, taking care of cats, dogs, chickens, cows, whatever animal was in need. She was, her and her group, her team, was working on taking care of them, trying to provide them food, catch them, rehome them, reunite them with their families when that was possible. I'm not quite sure how long she was doing that, but she definitely was active doing that for a little while. We also established our Fukushima shelter after that whole shebang, because we needed a place to put these animals that we've taken out of this exclusion danger zone, and that's how we got our Fukushima shelter. We also ended up opening up our Kyoto shelter in 2015, and Kyoto is also where we have our B&Bs, which are on the same darn street, which makes things super convenient. Our focus is on cats. We are Japan Cat Network, after all. We got founded because the original founders saw a need in their community to take care of the community cats, to get them healthy and well and not making this problem worse by having cats running around free. So we do focus on cats, but we have been known, almost forgot, these are our Fukushima kitties that we still have. But we have been known to take care of tanuki, or at least help a tanuki from where they are into a place that they can get their help. There's been at least one that I know of with a tanuki with mange, and we were able to get him off to a person who could better take care of him and clear up that mange infection. But we have taken care of dogs. These are Cha-Cha and Addie, the 2 of the dogs that stayed with JCN for the longest. For whatever reason, they never quite got adopted when we were up in Fukushima, or it wasn't until after we moved to Shinjuku and right after the corona hit that they finally got their homes together, happily. So why should you rescue? Why should you care? Pet stores are not the place to bring in an animal, nowhere in the world. Animals that come from a pet store, the moms are bred to be just production machines. They just want the babies. Just give us produce so we can sell. They're not well taken care of. Plus, in Japan, they cost too darn much. Why would I spend $2,000, $20,000 on an animal when you can get them for like $200 from a rescue? Save a life instead of breeding one? Also, you do want to help the stray cats in need. 80% of cats born in the wild will not make it to the first birthday. That's a huge number, and it's just simply because it's so hard to survive outside. And then even if they do get to that 1-year mark, it's still a hard life, and the average for stray cats is only about 5 to 6 years versus my sweet boys in my house, they're gonna have like 15 years. Makes sense to me. Pet abandonment is a problem in Japan. It's a bigger problem here than it is in other developed worlds, like in the US. We do have laws against just dropping your animals wherever. Japan doesn't have the same animal rights and laws, so people will just up and move and leave their cat outside. They can fend for themselves. They've never had to catch a meal, but they'll figure it out, or die trying. Hokenjos are not a place to go with the animal that you find. The reason why we want you to do the rescuing is because Hokenjo will just take it in, no vet care, very little attempts to rehome it or reunite them with their family. So after their shelf life, about 1 to 2 weeks, they're going to gas them. Police, they're no better. They'll do slight work, check the report, see if anyone reported a lost animal, and then they go to Hokenjo for their 1 to 2 week shelf life. So really, you don't have any other option other than going to an actual rescue like JCN or a Japanese one for those who happen to speak Japanese. So the basics on cat rescue. First, you need to identify a need. Then you need to perform trap, neuter, and rehome or return. This whole process is called TNR, and it works. It works because it makes sure that the cats that stay outside, they're healthy, the colony is maintained, and they're not spreading disease, and they're not bringing more little babies that are going to die before they hit a year old. So first off, you need to identify who needs to be rescued, because not everybody needs it, and some do need it more than others. So these are the key groups that you're looking for. Babies. The Typhoon Trio, Ty, Treat, Tweet, and Troy, TTT, my sweet little boys, they were rescued during a typhoon. Yeah, that's not a good place to be. There's a pretty good chance that if we had waited a couple hours for Mama to come back and try to get her again, been completely unsuccessful with that, they might not have survived. Typhoons, it was Typhoon Hagibis. That was a big one. That was a bad one. So yeah, we taken the babies. If you can get the mama too, that's ideal because you can stop the cycle with her if you can get her fixed and then she's not bringing in 80% of her babies to die. So babies are a good one to go for. Plus they're so cute, even if they are a bit painful and kept me awake at nights. If you find a cat that's injured, those really need your help. This is an example of a cat that my friend Jay recently rescued in Shinjuku. This cat got caught in one of those glue traps that people like to leave down for the mice and rodents and whatnot. It's a really unpleasant way to die if you're a rodent. It's not a very pleasant way to live if you're stuck in the glue as a cat. So luckily this cat was caught, taken to the vet, and they were able to basically give him a really bad haircut and then take him back to his home. He has a colony, he has caretakers, and it's a safe place for him to be. So sometimes that's all you need. Just get them fixed and get them back on their way. Just get them healthy again. Sometimes a cat is sick. Now, while I don't happen to have a picture of freshly sick Hudia, this little guy, when I found him on the street, his eyes were crusted over, he couldn't see. His nose was all clogged up and crusted, he couldn't smell. So when the danger came, he didn't know about it and couldn't run away from it, aka me. As much as I tried to catch his family because he had sweet little siblings, nope, they were healthy, and Mama had taught them, stay away. So unfortunately, I wasn't able to get his family, and I don't know what happened to them because that's in Chiba, and I live all the way near Yokota base. I was able to get him off the street. He was not one of the 80% that didn't make it to a year. He's got his forever home, and he's healthy, and you would never know he was a street kitty. But sometimes it's not just one random cat that needs your help. It's a whole colony. This is a colony in Kyoto that we ended up doing a little work with. And sometimes that's what you gotta do. You gotta go for the whole group. Takes time, one at a time sometimes, but they still need your help. So now you've identified who needs your help. This is what you need to do. Trap them. There are traps that you can buy, you can use. Sometimes vets have them are available on a loan basis. I know the vet that JCN does, that we use, he does have a trap that if you give him a 10,000 yen deposit, you can borrow the trap. You return the trap, you get your money back. That way he makes sure he gets his trap back and you can still do the good that you want to do of catching that sick cat, that injured cat, that old cat, that cat in the colony. However, once you've got your cat trapped, or even if they're super friendly, you can just pick them up. You don't want to put them in a cardboard box. They can easily jump out of that. Mine do it all the time when I empty out the Amazon box. But in a pinch, a Daiso carrier will work. Just go to Daiso, couple of baskets, zip tied together, boom, cat can't get out. But sometimes all you need is a little bit of luck. Sweet little Tovare over here, I was out visiting a Moomin Park with a friend of mine, and there's this sweet little kitty. Hey, sweetheart. Oh, you're still making babies. Yeah, that ain't gonna happen. Plus, this isn't a good place for kitties to be. I luckily happened to be right next to a Kind's Home store, so I walked right on in and bought a cat carrier for him. Took him home that night. He was able to get himself a good home after I took him to the vet. Luckily, he wasn't sick. He was just randomly in the streets somewhere, and I couldn't find his family. So after you've caught your kitty, what do? You gotta get him vetted. Spay and neuter is the first thing you want to do because you want to stop the process. You don't want to be be bringing in more cats and more kittens if you don't need to. There's already enough out there. Don't be making more. Don't be accidentally letting it happen. So getting them fixed. You can do that at places called TNR clinics. Basically, it's a vet care that only does the basics. It's spay, it's neuter, it's vaccine, maybe some deworming, and that's it. You're in, you're out, you pick them up later that day. At a spay and neuter clinic, you'll often find socket on echo or people who are using socket on echo tickets. Basically, it gets them that spay and neuter surgery done at a reduced price, because it ain't cheap here. Boys are at least Ichimon, girls can cost 2 mon to get fixed because it's more invasive for the ladies. But if you end up with a socket and echo, take a look at sweet little Kiji. Okay, I lied. He ain't sweet. But if you look at Kiji over there, he's got that little notch in his ear. That's an alert to anyone. Hey, he's been to the vet. He's not making more babies. Let him be. You don't have to stress him out by trying to catch him and taking him to the vet and then going under the sedation, because it's all been done before. So long as he's not sick and he's not hurt, he doesn't need to be caught. And so like I said, with the cost, it's going to be at least Ichimon if you take your cat to your local vet. But if you can find a TNR clinic or get a socket and echo ticket, not quite sure how that works, because I just kind of lean on JCN for that kind of a help if I were to be in that situation. But I know that it can be done for anywhere between nothing and 5,000 yen, which is a huge difference. And even with girls costing more, 5,000 yen to get her fixed and vaccinated is a really good deal. So the next step and the last step of the TNR process is to rehome or return. And your cat kind of determines which one's going to be best for that particular cat. It's a case-by-case basis. So who do you want to rehome? The ones that want to stay inside. The friendly ones, the cute ones, the ones that are social. Or the ones that are just too sick or too injured that going back outside, it's kind of going to kill them. We have a couple cats at our shelter in Setagaya that we just can't release because it's not fair to them. They don't like being inside, but putting them outside is going to make it hard for them because they're FIV positive, so they could spread it to others. We have a couple who have back leg issues, so the idea of them trying to run after a mouse isn't going to work so well. So find the ones you can rehome, or if you can't, it's kind of doing the best you can and lean on others who have some experience if you need help. And when you are rehoming, you want to try to do that as safely as you can for the animal. And that basically boils down to interviewing the people who are interested in adopting this kitty or fostering, doing a home check, make sure it's a safe place for them, and always, always, always charge a fee if they're going to adopt. The most dangerous price a cat can have is free. Never give away a free cat, free dog, free guinea pig. Please don't do it. Now, if the cat you have is healthy, is not injured, and is a little bit too spicy, you might just want to let them go be back outside. It's too stressful to keep them inside, and that's okay. It's still a very successful thing because they're still feeling their niche. If you take them out, another cat's just going to come back in. So by putting them back, they're healthy, they're not adding babies, and no other kitty's going to take that spot. Just make sure you take them back to the same spot. You don't want to move them somewhere else because then they have to fight for their territory there. So long as it's safe to be there, it's safe to return them there. So maybe you're not interested in doing TNR. That's okay. Not everybody wants to. We don't have the time, the effort, the energy, or the desire. Maybe you just don't find a cat in need. But you can still get involved. Wait, I'm jumping ahead of myself. Hang on. So top tips if you do some cat rescue. You want to be patient. It can take time to get a kitty in a trap, hours, sometimes it takes days. Even once you get them into your house, it can take time for them to socialize and warm up to you. One of my cats, I've had him for at least 6 years. He still doesn't like people. He trusts me sometimes. If you do find a cat at 2 in the morning and you have nowhere to store him, bathroom works. It's easy to clean, it's safe, it's secure. Put them in the bathroom for a couple hours with the food, the water, a towel for them to do their business on. They'll be fine till morning. If you do find a kitten, please don't feed them cow's milk. Cats really can't digest that, but kitten milk replacer, you can use that. If you're 2 in the morning and you can't even get that, Chew-Doo is available at Conveni's. All cats love it. It works. You do want to keep in mind if it's cold out, you just like with people, when we get too cold, slowly warm them up so they don't go into shock. Kittens can't regulate their body temperature, so you want to give them both a warm spot, like a hot water bottle or a heating pad, but also a spot that doesn't have that heat so they can get away from it if they want to. Fading kitten syndrome is a problem. It basically just means the cat's not doing well and they're going down quickly, and cats, especially kittens, can pass real quickly. So just keep an eye on them for those first couple of days after you've done your rescue. And if all else fails, Kitten Lady on YouTube. She has a lot of fantastic, great resources when there's nobody online at 2 in the morning. You can watch her videos. Now I can talk about how to get involved if you don't want to rescue. So the number one thing you can do, the easiest thing to do, is just donate. Luckily for us, JCN is doing for Thankful Tuesday, which is November 29th. If you donate to JCN via our PayPal, that yen for yen, penny for penny, dollar for dollar, you will be matched. So it's a great way to help out and double your donation. You can also volunteer with us. If you want to come to Setagaya, I know a gal. You can also foster or adopt if coming to Setagaya is not convenient for you. And you know what? I just don't care at all. I just want to go on vacation. Go to Maneki Machiya and B&B, our Maneki Machiya B&Bs in Kyoto. Indirectly, it does support JC, and it's the JC and B&Bs down there. And if you're part of our Facebook group, be a volunteer transporter. Take them mostly within Japan, but every now and again, you kind of take a kitty overseas to help a family in need. But that's JCN. We're here to help you, to help the pets, to help the animals. Thank you.
That wasn't so bad, was it?
I'm still shaking.
You're still shaking.
Am I done yet?
No, you got to do question. You got to do question and answer now.
Okay.
All right. So we've got any question right in the front row.
Thank you for doing all that work for the cats. I appreciate it. So I'm guessing you're American.
Yes.
Did you see there was this documentary that came out recently called Inside the Mind of a Cat?
On Netflix? Yeah, I've watched that.
Do you think it's true that Japanese cats have personalities that are different from American cats?
I don't know, because my cats, while they're born in Japan, they're raised in my house. So as far as I'm concerned, they're American by parentage.
And you can fix them that fast?
Yeah.
Their accent is completely different. Any other questions? Anybody interested in fostering? Yeah. Could y'all pass that down? Thank you.
Sorry, no, I'm not volunteering to foster, but what percentage of the cats and dogs in this country are chipped? Do you take any of these to be checked if they've been
I don't
chipped?
know that number, but I do know that recently Japan has passed a law that all animals that are purchased from a pet store and presumably from a rescue that are adopted do need to be microchipped. I know that my 3 are microchipped and my previous one was, and that's partly because with traveling to the US and back with 2 of them, they had to be microchipped. But also, if they ever do get out and they lose their collar, I want proof that this is my kitty and I want them back, please. And so that way, if they go to the vet and the vet scans them, they're like, oh, belongs to that crazy cat lady. Let's return that cat, please. It's definitely recommended, but I don't know how many actually are within Japan.
So when you take one of these cats you've trapped to the vet for the first time, is it standard procedure for them to check if the cat's been chipped?
As far as I'm aware, it's not standard procedure yet in Japan, because microchipping as a rule is just recently been passed within like the last couple of months. It's definitely more common in the US because they've been around a lot longer and people are always advocating for that in the US, so shelters and vets will check it. If I were to pick up a cat, I would be asking to to at least check, but 9 times out of 10 or more, probably 99% of the time, there isn't one. It's just not common enough yet.
Thanks.
Anyone else? I have a question for you. For fostering, what's the average time within JCN that people foster an animal?
It's up to the individual family. Some people are emergency fosters only. Some people only do it. I know a couple of our volunteers, one had taken in a pregnant mama, and she fostered those kittens through their birth and for the first couple of months until they were old enough to get spayed, neutered, vaccinated, and then either go to their forever home or come to the shelter. Other times, we had another family in Saitama who fostered for a month because we would not allow them to adopt until those 2 cats were neutered. That's part of JCN's rule, is that we will not adopt out an animal that's not fixed. We don't want the risk of more coming from one of ours. But yeah, it's just kind of up to individuals. I've done long-term fostering where I've had cats for basically 11 months and like, hey, I'm going home for the summer. Can you find a summer home for this kitty, please? And for the longest time, my first several fosters, like, yep, great. And they never came back to me. They shortly thereafter found their forever home. And then I took in Cash, and he kept coming back to me after the end of the summer, like, that's fine. I love him. He can go to a forever home, but I'll keep fostering him. And then I failed. I'm like, okay, you know what? Tweet's adorable. You're adorable. I already have Neko. I'll just keep all of you. Thankfully, my landlords agreed.
Thank you. Anyone else? Any other questions? Okay. Yeah. We're a little bit short on this time.
All right.
But, yeah, if you have a question you were too nervous to ask, Lee's sticking around, I think.
Yeah, for a little bit.
Yeah, so, yes, drinking time break thing. Drinking.
Yes,
drink,
please.
Drink, yes, drink lots. If I could get Bruce, though, if you could jump over here so we could do this, and Lewis, if you're still here, I hope. Right? Yes. You don't have to come up right this second, but once we go to the break, then I just need the speaker shot. So let's do that. And just a reminder for people at home, we mute the. I should be talking to the camera. We mute the stream because we don't want to get into copyright trouble with our music. So it'll be quiet until we come back. All right. Break time.
Woohoo!
Yay! Okay. So we're coming back. If you're just grabbing a last-minute drink, feel free to do that. While I'm talking, it's your last chance to get drinks. Before we start again, I just want to give a big thank you to all our volunteers tonight. Andrew Bruce Todd, who not only runs the bar, who's about to be our next speaker as well. I got to introduce him how many times tonight. Not only runs the bar, but does a lot of the back-end speaker hunting and organization. There's no way this show would have returned from hiatus without this guy. So thank you, sir. I'd also like to thank Coco and Rio, who are behind the bar tonight, filling in for our absent friend Andrea, who's out at sea at the moment. And and also everybody, like Coco and Rio and Andrew and Melvin, who's running our camera, and are also here to help us with setup and teardown and filling in sort of wherever they're needed as well. But yeah, Melvin, our stalwart camera guy. I'd also like to thank Yoji, who ran the entire AV desk tonight. He ran sound, he ran video, he's doing the whole thing. And making sure I don't end up with a migraine. Thank you, Yoji. Big thank you. Actually, I just want to send a big thank you out. I don't think I've done this since we restarted, to our Nerd Night boss emeritus, Amanda, who still occasionally helps out by doing things like pinning tweets from her new home in Finland. So thank you, Amanda. I don't think you're watching. I think the time difference is too weird. But anyway, and of course, I really need to thank the venue, Japan Dance School, who have provided the World Peace Theater for us to do the show in. And I guess in the words of Vanessa William, I went and saved the best for last. Selena, thank you. You're always on door and handing microphones around. It's lovely to have you here. And she's the one who makes sure you guys get a warm welcome when you show up. So big thank you to the volunteers. Yay! All right. Next slide, please. Next slide. Oh, that was supposed to be. Okay, keep going. Yay! Andrew Bruce Todd. 3 last names in a row. One of them fake and my fault. Andrew is a software engineer, aspiring writer, and human. So that's Dawn's line. You know that, right? Dawn has left Japan. You are now the human. Okay. The Nerd Night human. So please don't try to rescue him at the end of his talk. He is from Baltimore, Maryland, as opposed to Baltimore, Kentucky, but moved to Tokyo about 3.5 years ago, where he almost immediately started volunteering for Nerd Night. Anyway, can I get a big round of applause for Bruce, Andrew, Todd?
And all of that is true about me proceeding. So tonight, I want to talk about something that's been sort of bouncing around in my head for a while, and I'm hoping I can explain this in a way that will be interesting, and that is the end of end-to-end. It's just a small slice of how point-to-point privacy on the World Wide Web works, and I'm going to throw in some 1980s novelty phones as well. If you find any of this interesting, or if you want to read more about it, you can go to my website. I've already posted this slide deck there, and I'm working on an article to sort of expand on this in the future. So a little bit about me to start. I've been a software engineer for about 15 years now, most of that in my hometown of Baltimore, but I packed up and moved here about 3.5 years ago. Someone recently said that I was the super cool Nerd Night bartender, so I'm just going to leave that in quotes up there. And say thank you to everyone who supports us, not only by coming to Nerd Night, but by buying drinks and snacks and helping us pay our bill here. Most relevant to the talk tonight, many years ago, I was a double major in both computer science and in history, specifically the history of technology. And throughout my career as an engineer, I've always tried to understand software through the lens of where it came from, its history. If you think about even your smartphone, for instance, whether it's from Apple or from Google, the reality is that some of the code on there is probably 20 or 30 years old. It was originally made for different purposes. It was made by people with specific goals in mind. And By understanding that, we can sometimes understand software better. Plus, it's often the case that things become more complicated over time. So if we look into the past, we can build up an understanding of these ideas by looking at how they started. Before I go any farther, I am going to make a couple of disclaimers. This talk is totally focused on policy in the United States because that's what I know about. And I would love to know more about how things work in Japan. The other disclaimer that I'm going to make is that at the end, there's going to be some wild speculation. And you'll know when that comes along. And I just don't want any misunderstandings to come out of this about what I believe to be the case versus what I think might be a risk or might be true. So with that, I'll get started. Tonight I'm going to talk about some ideas in how what is valuable to us is always vulnerable. And as more and more of our lives have moved online, more and more of what is valuable has also become vulnerable globally. So I want you to keep that in mind throughout the talk. And also, when I say valuable, I mean not just to us personally, the things that are important to us, but the things that other people or bad people or hackers might find valuable, what they can extract from us. You may have heard advice like this in the past. Always use HTTPS when you're browsing the web. Look for it in the address bar. Make sure that the websites that you use the most use HTTPS. That way, your connections are end-to-end encrypted. And that way, you're going to be safe. This is good advice. This is excellent advice, and you should pay attention to this on the web. It gets easier and easier every year to follow this advice. But it leaves a few questions open. So first of all, what is end-to-end? And then, is HTTPS there in the URL? Does that really guarantee end-to-end privacy? So tonight I want to try and explain this a little using two intertwined stories. One is the history of surveillance in America. The other is the history of freedom of access to telecommunications. And of course, naturally, to explain HTTPS and the internet, I'm going to start in the most logical place with Abraham Lincoln and the American Civil War. So the first telegraph lines were laid in America in the early 1950s. And by the time of the Civil War in the 1860s, most of America, especially in the North, was crisscrossed with telegraph lines. Now, at the time, if you wanted to send a message from one city to another, and you lived in a small city, you would go into an office that looked something like this. And you would write down your message, an operator would take it, read that message, and then key it in. At this point in time, the whole process was still largely manual. So if you wanted to transmit something a long distance, you would typically have to have it relayed by several operators along the way. And keep in mind that the entire process is, I'll say, managed by professionals. You can't simply just hook into a telegraph wire and send your own messages. Everything that you send will be read and seen by many people you don't know along the way. There's an enormous amount of trust involved in this process. But as this was the only means available, it was revolutionary, and people sent things that were very personal and very critical along the way. At the same time, it became immediately evident that telegrams would be useful to the war effort, not only because they allowed command and control from Washington, D.C. for the North, but because of the opportunities that they offered for surveillance. In fact, just a year or two after the war started, Lincoln authorized his Secretary of War, Edwin Stanton, to reroute all of the telegraph lines in the nation to pass through Washington, D.C. Effectively, every message that was sent on the wire was read by the Department of War. And this was used for several purposes. An obvious one was to collect information about what was being sent. But it was also used for censorship. Several journalists were actually arrested and jailed for the duration of the war based on information that came out of these messages. Many other messages never reached their destination. So both sides were aware of this. They were aware that anything they sent, whether it was by telegraph or by any other means, could be intercepted and read. So they used encryption. This is an example of an encoded Union telegram. And it's a very simple scheme. It's difficult to read up here on the screen. But for example, in this scheme, both the sender and the receiver had access to a code book. This code book was similar to a dictionary. And what you would do is take important words in the message, like President of the United States, or to Ulysses S. Grant, the commander of the forces, and you would replace them with nonsense words from the dictionary. For example, in this message, it was signed, it actually is printed, signed President of US, but the way it was transmitted over the telegraph was as Y'all Balfour. Y'all Balfour could be translated by either the sender or receiver into signed President of US. So from this 150 years ago, we can already understand the first part of the definition of end-to-end encryption. And that is the idea that only the people, and later the machines, at the ends should be able to understand what is sent in the message. The telegraph operators in the middle cannot. I think it's also important to understand that this principle, typically when you see end-to-end encrypted technologies, they're not tied to any one particular means of communication. This same technique could have been used to secure messages that were sent by carrier pigeon or by mail or by smoke signals, all of which were also used in the war. So now let's move forward a century to the 1960s. And I chose this picture of a telephone not because it's from the 1960s, it's actually from the 70s and 80s. I chose it because this was the telephone I had on my desk growing up. As did millions of others in the United States. This was manufactured by Western Electric for AT&T. But imagine the beginning of the 1960s. Touch-tone phones like this were introduced early in the decade, and at the same time, it became easier and easier to directly connect to someone no matter where they were in America. You could pick up the phone and dial someone across the country without ever involving an operator. There was this new feeling that you had a truly private means of telecommunication for the first time. Whereas with the telegraph, you always knew that there was someone involved. Now, this isn't exactly true, of course. After World War II, the intelligence apparatus that had been set up for the war continued to live on in the form of agencies like the NSA in America. Common sense dictated that if you were really concerned about someone listening to what you had to say, you probably shouldn't say it over the phone. But all the same, we see the beginning of truly personal communications. There were still some problems, though, with this. This is a Carter phone. This is a device that was introduced in the 1950s by the Carter Electric Company, founded, not surprisingly, by a Mr. Carter. And the idea was that you could use it to connect a telephone to a two-way radio. So if you had someone, say, in a farm field who wanted to talk to someone at the other end of a telephone line, or if you worked for a dispatch company that had trucks out and they needed to be able to patch you into a telephone system, you could use a Carter phone to do it. And what you'll notice about this is that it's designed to accept a telephone receiver. In order to do that, to use this, someone had to pick up the phone and place it into this cradle, and then dial the phone number that you wish to connect to. And you might naturally ask, like, why would you do that? Like, clearly you're going to get a terrible connection out of this because you have this acoustic coupling. This is known as an acoustic coupler. It requires more manual intervention. There's really no way, easy way in the 1950s to dial the phone number automatically or hang it up. And the reason, as it turns out, is because AT&T, which then had a monopoly on the phone systems in the United States, simply didn't want that to happen. They had worked with the American regulators, the FCC, to ensure that only AT&T-owned equipment could be connected directly to the system. And this was enforced by law. I'll point out that about a decade or two later, AT&T, after Star Wars came out, chose to make their logo the Death Star. So Mr. Carter was not happy about this, and he went to the FCC and petitioned them. He said, I should be able to connect my device, which doesn't harm anything, directly to the network. It took several years to decide, but eventually in 1968, they came up with the Carter phone decision, which said that any lawful device, that is, any device that does not interfere with the operation of the network may be connected to the telephone network. And this was revolutionary. It led to a number of revolutionary technologies that we now take for granted today, like the Garfield phone. It's amazing. You pick up the receiver and its eyes open. And the robot phone. And the enterprise phone. The stiletto phone. The Sports Illustrated sneaker phone. The Sports Illustrated football phone. The Sports Illustrated football helmet phone. The Crest toothpaste man phone. The French fry phone. Its good friend, the ketchup phone. And of course, the banana phone. So this is great. But the idea that I want you to get here is that we're seeing communications become truly personal. It's something that you have some sort of control over, that you feel you have control over. And of course, this decision also led to a lot of really important innovations like dial-up modems, which is how many of us probably got on the internet for the first time, fax machines, and answering machines as well. But what's most relevant to this talk, since I'm talking about encryption, is that around the same time in the 1970s, we also start to see the rise of encrypted telephones and encrypted teletype devices. This device on the bottom right is a teletype device, a portable teletype from the 1970s. And as you can see, it actually has an acoustic coupler. So if you were working for a government agency or for a very paranoid corporation, and you were in a remote office anywhere, or at a payphone even, you could pick this up and securely communicate with people in the home office. Typically, the way that these systems work, this is an encrypted phone from the early 1990s as well, is that you would have some sort of card that identified you and had a cryptographic key on it. So you would put the card into the machine that would identify you and enable you to receive encrypted messages meant for you. There would similarly be another key at the far end. So already by the 1970s and 1980s, although these ideas were not really being, I'll say, written down as clearly yet, we have the rest of the principles of end-to-end encryption really coming about. So we already knew that only the people at the beginning and end should be able to read the message. That is to say, you have to have one of these terminals to understand the message. But if you think back to that Civil War message, all they did was replace some of the words in it. Any of those telegraph operators along the way could have intentionally replaced words in the message, either rendering it unintelligible or possibly changing its meaning dramatically. For instance, if you change the word from to or something like that. It was possible for people in the middle to modify what was happening. With newer encryption systems, that should not be possible. It should not be possible to modify or add to what is being sent. And finally, related to that, you should have some sort of assurance that you're communicating with whom you think you're communicating with. That's typically hard to establish beyond the idea that the person on the other end has access to the key card that you think they have access to, or access to the key. But that is is an important principle in end-to-end communications. The reality is, over time, there have been different mathematical breaks. There are new attacks found on end-to-end encryption. But typically, at the time that it's being used, end-to-end encryption works when it's implemented well. And this is important for a lot of people. At the beginning of the talk, I mentioned that what is valuable is vulnerable. And as things move more and more online, they become more vulnerable and therefore need more protection. During the Civil War, the most concerned people were, of course, the governments, the armies that needed protection. But by the 1970s and 1980s, corporations as well started to have concerns. In fact, about 22 years ago, we found out that American intelligence was eavesdropping on pretty much everything going on in Europe and Japan, and occasionally using that information to benefit American companies, to help them win bids over their competitors in Europe and Japan. Now, to be fair, they often did this by exposing corruption, bribery by those companies in Europe and Japan, but it was done through essentially widespread intelligence gathering. So corporations, as well as governments, now had reasons to be paranoid. And you might ask, if encryption is so good and it works so well, how did intelligence agencies continue to gather this information? As of 2020, we also know that in 1970, the BND, which was the West German intelligence agency, and the American CIA jointly purchased a Swiss cryptography company called Crypto AG. And that company continued to be under control of the CIA until 2018. They manufactured and sold, knowingly, faulty encryption devices that they were aware the NSA would be able to decrypt. In fact, those two devices I showed you earlier were both manufactured by Crypto AG. I know for a fact that the teletype machine on the right was sold in two different variants. One went to NATO governments and was unbreakable by the NSA. The other variant went to everybody else, whether that was corporations, local governments, governments all over the world that were not part of NATO, and could easily be monitored and intercepted by the NSA. This went on for decades. So, as I'm moving into the internet portion of this talk, I want you to keep in mind that good encryption is often easy to break. Sorry, excuse me, it is not easy to break, but it is often easy to circumvent. So we've come to the internet. And the internet brings together many of these concepts that have been evolving over the last 150 years. It's open to any lawful device. And that might seem obvious to us, that we can use anything we want to connect to the internet, our smartphones, our televisions, our computers even. But that wasn't necessarily going to be the case. For example, prior to the internet's rise in the 1990s, the most successful information service in the world was a French service called Minitel, which was much more restricted in how it operated. And if you look at modern innovations like the app stores that Google and Apple have on their smartphones, we see a much more controlled environment where only what those companies allow to be sold or accessed can be sold and accessed. So this is a great thing. We have the internet, and it's still largely free of gatekeepers. There's a very high level of freedom of access. But the issue with that is that I think we now need to consider surveillance as being done not just by governments, but by many different entities at many different levels. And one of the most obvious and I think well-known examples of this is that if you're using an open Wi-Fi access point, for instance at a coffee shop or an airport, then it's possible for anyone to eavesdrop on what's being transmitted. But the good news is, at least now in 2022, it's easy for anyone to use HTTPS on their website. That wasn't the case 10 years ago. That wasn't the case 15 years ago. There's been an enormous uptick in its use. And in fact, if you're using Firefox, you can switch it into a mode which blocks any website which is not using HTTPS. That's how far we've come. And this is great. If I'm connecting to a website like Zombocom, where anything is possible, then I can be reasonably sure, if I'm using HTTPS, that only me and whoever is sitting on Zombocom can see what's going on and what is transacting between us. No one who is intercepting this traffic, even if I'm sitting in a coffee shop, can see what's happening over this HTTPS connection. So that's great. But the bad news is the internet is also full of hacked devices. It's full of vulnerable devices. It's full of poorly maintained devices. And you might be picturing in your head that this is people's home computers, Windows PCs, laptops, phones, security cameras, that kind of thing. And it's true, many of those are often hacked. But the reality is these days that many companies, even very technically literate companies, will often discover that they have servers sitting in a data center or in the cloud somewhere that have been subverted and are now part of some sort of malicious network. The reality is that every website is a potential attack target. And when I say attack, I'm mainly thinking of things like DDoS attacks, where a large number of computers, usually hacked computers, will start sending a lot of spurious requests to a website, either to cost it a lot of money in things like bandwidth, or to take down the site. This might be done for political reasons, it might be done for ideological reasons, it might be done to try and extract some sort of ransom or to distract from some other attack that's going on. And the other reality is that very few companies are equipped to deal with these attacks. Some of you may have seen messages like this as you're browsing the internet. Both of these messages come from a company called Cloudflare. Cloudflare is what's known as a CDN, although that term has become increasingly outdated as what they do continues to evolve. And what Cloudflare does is provide protection from these kinds of attacks, a protection that has become more and more invaluable over the past 10 years. Cloudflare, now by its own reckoning, says that they handle 20 to 30% of all internet traffic. And if you're accessing a site that's protected by Cloudflare, you're still using HTTPS, so you're protected from those eavesdroppers in the coffee shop. But you've introduced another eavesdropper into the equation. If I'm going to Zombocom and they put Cloudflare in front of their website, I'm end-to-end encrypted, but I'm end-to-end encrypted from me to Cloudflare. Then they decrypt the message, look at it, make sure that it's okay, re-encrypt it, and send it onward to Zombocom. So there's now a third party involved. In some ways, it's like we've gone back to the telegraph. There's an extra relay. And this bothers me. This bothers me a bit. I've been looking around on the internet to try and see what some of the other opinions are about this. And by and large, it may or may not be end-to-end, depending on how you look at it. A lot of people think, well, this company made a contract with Cloudflare, so Cloudflare is on their list of approved services. They're therefore part of the company. And so we should consider this end-to-end encryption. And Cloudflare has spent a lot of effort. They have some very talented engineers making it clear that they're not going to use their essentially carte blanche access to everything sent over their network for malicious purposes. They've gone through a lot of effort to build trust. But all the same, the potential is there for what we would call a man-in-the-middle attack, which is kind of obvious in what it is. Cloudflare has the ability to take 20 to 30% of the web's traffic and either read it and do whatever they want with that information. And I'm not talking about things like passwords, private information, that sort of thing, or alter it in some way. For instance, to send a malicious script to a targeted host. And this is where we get to the wild speculation part. I said at the beginning, this is basically how I am every day, being a software engineer. I said at the beginning, what's valuable is vulnerable. And Cloudflare is extremely valuable. I'm targeting them because they're the biggest and because they give away their services for free. And without prejudice, I'll add. They protected a lot of sites that are extremely controversial, far-right hate sites, that sort of thing. They have an enormous treasure trove of data that would be invaluable to any intelligence agency, not just the NSA, but China, Iran, Russia, New Zealand. It would be invaluable to any criminal group. And the reality is, in this decade, there are likely even independent criminal groups who have the ability to at least attempt to penetrate a company like Cloudflare. And of course, there's also the possibility that Cloudflare as an American company could be in some way coordinating with a friendly intelligence agency considered to be benign or helpful. And this is really concerning. But of course, all we can do is speculate about this. So at the beginning of the talk, I said that this is the end of end-to-end. But in some ways, it's also the beginning. The past 10 years, and companies like Cloudflare, along with many other technologies, have for the first time really democratized access to encryption. It's much more available to the average person today than it was 10 years ago. And Cloudflare is a major part of that. I don't want to reduce that, but I think that we can do better. So to wrap up this talk, I have a few suggestions. At the top, I'll start with a few things that anyone can do, and I think it will make your life better. First of all, use an ad blocker. Typically, ads and trackers, they're served from CDNs like Cloudflare, although they tend to be from other CDNs, not them. So use uBlock Origin or a similar add-on to your browser. Similarly, use an add-on called Decentralize. A lot of scripts, JavaScript that is used commonly across different websites is served from CDNs to help speed up the process. But if you use Decentralize, not only will your sites load faster, but it would be much more difficult for a CDN to inject a malicious script or monitor your activity using those scripts. If you make websites, make them boring. Make them really plain, okay? Like, don't use pictures. Don't use video. I'm not even joking. Like, make them all look like, Craigslist in 1996, or, because that uses less bandwidth. You don't need a CDN to service a simple website. Going down the line, if you want, try to support services that don't use CDNs like this. Services like Signal. Signal, if you read their blog, it's a messaging service. You can compare it with WhatsApp or Facebook Messenger. They are very, very clear about the information that they collect and what they have the ability to collect. And they are very clear about how they use encryption to prevent themselves from being able to collect that data. As we go on, there's some things that our governments and our society could do better. It would be better if our computers were secured better. That's hard to incentivize, but I think it's necessary. That would make many fewer computers available for attack, to basically propagate attacks. If we could better police internet crime, it would improve the situation. But this is again difficult because so many criminals and attackers are based in countries that don't have an interest in prosecuting them. And finally, and most difficult, if you can figure out a way to make an internet that is more DDoS resistant and less dependent on trust in all of the endpoints. And by the way, the answer to this is not any of the things that are crashing out this week, like Web3 or crypto or any of that. That would help enormously. And if that doesn't work, we can always go back to the sneaker phone. So that's my talk. It's available on my website, and I think we have a few minutes left for questions. Thank you.
Well done. Classic Nerd Night talk. Okay, so which is unfortunate because we have very few minutes left for questions.
Sorry.
And that was it's very dense. Right, but you can find him on his website and ask him questions there with end-to-end encryption. Anyway, I'm going to stop talking and we're going to see if anyone needs any questions. Any questions? Okay. All right.
Yeah, very interesting. How can I, as a user, see that there's someone in the middle?
Yes. So if you're specifically interested in learning about Cloudflare, there's a few add-ons for Firefox that I know of that will tell you if the IP address that you're connecting to belongs to Cloudflare or not. So it'll actually show in like your address bar, whether you're connecting through Cloudflare or not. I don't know if there's anyone who's tried to do this for all of them. I mean, Google, all the major companies, Google, Microsoft, and so forth, Amazon, and so forth, have their own CDNs. There's a few more independent ones, but it's something I've considered doing. So, yeah.
At the address bar is
So if you look at your address bar and it says HTTPS, then you're encrypted. I mean, you're good, but you might have a CDN like Cloudflare in the middle. But if you you can have an add-on to your browser that can also tell you you're encrypted, but Cloudflare can read this stuff in addition to the website you're going to. So yeah, yep.
Yeah, thanks for the nice talk. The history was really cool. That there's a lot to say, but I think that how do we know how big the problem? I mean, somebody told me who works in a friend in Silicon Valley they said that there's constant ransom attacks that are occurring where people are taking over companies like servers and holding them hostage and demanding a ransom to release it. They said that it's not reported in the media, that the companies just don't want anyone to know about it because it's an embarrassment and it makes them look like, and of course there might actually be a legal liability or something. They have to tell their users that their data was accessed or stolen or something like. So there's constant cover-ups and there's I don't know, does anybody really know how big this problem is and how widespread it is? I mean, it's really
That's a good question. I mean, you're absolutely correct. I don't know. I don't have the numbers for you, but when it comes to ransomware attacks, to give some perspective, there's an entire island nation in the Pacific right now. Their entire government was essentially ransomed. They're doing everything via paper at the moment. But yes, depending on the jurisdiction you're in, your obligation to report a ransomware attack is different, I believe. So we do hear about some of them. Only a fraction of those will then get reported in the news. But by and large, yes, people do pay the ransoms. And so this continues to be profitable. And it happens all the time. It's happened in my hometown, my city of Baltimore as well, a couple of years ago. Typically, people end up falling back on their Gmail accounts and that kind of thing to keep government going. So, yeah.
Have we got any other questions? We only have time for maybe one more. Man in the fantastic sweater.
Thank you for the talk. So when it comes to securing access to the internet, I hear that people say like using a VPN would be an option, and I'm wondering if that also has like the same issue as using Cloudflare, or like it has like a different issue.
Sure. So I don't personally use a VPN. They certainly have their uses, and I've debated whether I should be using one or not. But you're right in the sense that if you are connecting to things that aren't over HTTPS or aren't end-to-end secured in some way, then your VPN can see exactly what's being sent across it. So what the VPN really gives you is a different IP address. So if you're connecting to Zombocom again, and you're connecting through a VPN, then it looks like it's coming from the VPN's IP address, not from yours. And that's helpful, but if you're logging into an account and that sort of thing, like, and you're not using HTTPS, then you could certainly still have your passwords taken, that kind of thing. And this is what makes, for websites in particular, HTTPS so important.
Okay, super. I think that's going to be all we have time for. If you have a burning question you need to ask, Andrew's sticking around. So we are going to rip this place up and tear it up. But before we do that, I just want to thank all of you for coming out tonight. And it's so lovely to see so many familiar faces and a couple new ones. And please check your last trains if you're going to hang around and chat, and just make sure that you make it home. They have changed since the pandemic, so they're a little bit earlier than they used to be. So just please double check. I don't want anyone, maybe other than me, to get stranded here again. So I believe that's it. So big thank you to Andrew for his talk.
Thank you all for coming.
Big thank you to all three speakers. Yay! It was a good night. And we'll see you in December. That's terrible. I'm sorry. All right, good night.